A story of lies, regret, and heartbreak that will keep you on the edge of your seat till the very last second. What happens when you lose everything you thought you could never lose? Stay tuned to find out how one man's mistakes lead to the irreversible loss of his world. The house was eerily quiet. Maria had always been the type to fill the silence with her laughter. But tonight there was no sound, just the tick-tock of the clock. And his breathing. He sat still, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a familiar sound, but tonight it felt wrong. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't ignore it. His eyes flicked to the door. He could feel her presence before he even saw her. The door creaked open slowly. And there she was, Maria Muñoz. Her face was calm. Too calm. He felt his throat tighten. She wasn't mad. Not yet. But he knew it was coming. He could see it in her eyes. Her gaze was sharp, cutting through him. She stepped forward. Each step sounded like thunder in his ears. The air felt thicker with every inch she closed. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel her breath. "Do you know what I found?" she asked, her voice steady. His stomach dropped. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. The letter. The one he thought she'd never see. But she had. And now, everything was unraveling. He couldn't look her in the eye. Maria didn't wait for him to respond. She reached into her bag and pulled something out. A small, folded piece of paper. His heart raced. It was the letter. He didn't need to read it to know. Her silence screamed louder than any words ever could. "Maria," he whispered, his voice trembling. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her expression said everything. The room felt colder now. The weight of her stare was unbearable. He wanted to speak, to explain. But he couldn't. The truth hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. And then, in a moment of clarity, he understood. It was over. The silence stretched on. Every second felt like a lifetime. His hands were clammy, gripping the armrest of the chair. He couldn't breathe. The letter in her hand seemed to grow heavier, thicker with each passing moment. Maria's gaze never wavered. She was waiting for him to say something, anything. But he couldn't find the words. His mind raced. What could he say now? What was left to salvage? The weight of his actions crushed him, pressing down on his chest. He had thought he could get away with it. He had been so sure. But now, there was no escape. Not from her eyes. Not from the truth. Finally, Maria spoke. Her voice was soft, but it stung. "You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you?" The question hung in the air, sharp and cold. He didn't answer. What could he say? Her eyes narrowed slightly. She took a slow step closer. Her presence was overwhelming. "You think you can lie to me," she continued, her voice calm but unwavering. "You think I wouldn't see through your games?" Her words cut deeper than any accusation. It was the truth. The simple, undeniable truth. And he couldn't deny it anymore. She was right. Every part of him wanted to scream, to shout that he hadn't meant for it to go this far. But he knew better. There was no excuse for what he had done. Maria took another step closer. Now they were inches apart. He could feel the heat of her breath, and it made him shiver. "You've been caught," she said, her voice quiet, but with a finality that rang in his ears. Her words were like ice. A cold slap to his face. He wanted to say something. Anything. But the words wouldn't come. Her silence now filled the room like a dense fog. She wasn't angry, not yet. But the way she stood there, so still, made his skin crawl. Her eyes bored into him, as if she could see the very core of his being. His pulse thudded in his ears. He shifted uncomfortably, unable to escape her gaze. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maria spoke again. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked. The question was simple, yet it shook him to his core. His throat went dry. He swallowed hard, but the words stuck. He wanted to tell her it wasn't what she thought. He wanted to explain, to beg for her forgiveness. But he knew it would never be enough. Maria wasn't asking for an answer. Her question wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. Her trust, her heart, her everything. She had given him so much, and he had thrown it all away. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, and then the silence returned. It was suffocating now. The walls felt like they were closing in. He didn't know how much more he could take. "I'm tired of the lies," she finally said, her voice trembling just slightly. There it was, the pain beneath her calm exterior. It hit him harder than anything before. She wasn't just disappointed. She was broken. And it was all his doing. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Maria wasn't looking at him anymore. She had turned away, her back to him now. Her shoulders were stiff, and her hands were clenched into fists. He could feel the weight of her pain, the crushing loss of everything they had built. And that was when it hit him. The full, unrelenting weight of his betrayal. It wasn't just the affair. It was the trust he had shattered. The life they had shared, now slipping away like sand through his fingers. She didn't even turn to face him again. She just walked toward the door. And with one final look over her shoulder, she said softly, "I can't do this anymore." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that echoed in the empty room. The sound of it lingered, hanging in the air like a ghost. He couldn't move. His body was frozen, trapped in the thick stillness she had left behind. It was as if the house had emptied of life, leaving only him, a shell of the man he once was. The walls felt too close, the space too small. His chest ached, but there was no relief. Only an emptiness that grew deeper with every breath. He sat there, staring at the door, willing it to open again. But it didn't. His thoughts swirled in chaos. How had it come to this? He had never imagined it would end like this. He thought he could fix it, that he could make things right. But now, the realization hit harder than anything before. There was no fixing this. His fingers gripped the edge of the chair, digging into the fabric, but it didn't help. The truth had sunk in completely. It wasn't just Maria he had betrayed. It was everything they had built, the life they shared, the plans they had made, now shattered beyond repair. His stomach twisted, a gnawing feeling that refused to go away. The quiet in the house felt suffocating. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. He wanted to call out to her, to beg for another chance. But the words died on his lips. What would be the point? What could he say now that hadn't already been said in her silence? A faint tremor ran through him as the weight of his actions settled in. The betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a decision. A choice he had made. And now he would have to live with it. The air in the room felt colder, even though the heater was running. He could almost hear the echo of Maria's voice in his head, her words repeating over and over. "I can't do this anymore." And as he sat there, the hours passing unnoticed, he realized just how true that was. Because neither could he. The darkness outside deepened as the night wore on. Inside, the house remained still, frozen in time. The clock ticked, each second a painful reminder of what had been lost. He sat motionless, barely aware of the passing hours. The weight of her departure was a constant pressure on his chest, a relentless reminder of his failure. The emptiness in the house matched the emptiness in his heart. He had never imagined this would be his reality. His thoughts churned, but they were fragmented, scattered. Each memory of Maria felt distant now, as if she was someone from another life. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the growing ache inside him. But it wouldn't go away. Not now. Not ever. A small part of him wanted to convince himself that there was still time. That maybe she would return. Maybe she would forgive him. But deep down, he knew that was a lie. The door had closed. And with it his chances. The letter, the secret he had tried so hard to hide, had changed everything. It wasn't just the affair, though, that had been enough. It was the trust he had broken. The bond they had once shared, now shattered beyond repair. He thought about the lies, the excuses, the little moments of deceit. Each one seemed so small when they happened, so insignificant. But together, they had built something too big to ignore. Something that Maria had seen for what it was. The truth. And now, as he sat there, he couldn't escape it. Not from the house, not from himself. The sound of the clock seemed to grow louder, louder with every passing minute. It was like a countdown to the end. Of everything. He stood up slowly, as if trying to shake off the weight of the room. His legs felt weak, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse. But he forced himself forward, to the door that had just moments ago separated them. His hand hovered over the doorknob, but he didn't turn it. He knew better. There was no going back. Not this time. Maria had made that clear. And he had nothing left to say. The only thing that remained now was the silence. His hand dropped from the doorknob. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He took a step back, away from the door. The weight of the house felt even heavier now, pressing in from every corner. He walked aimlessly through the rooms, the emptiness of each one making his heart sink deeper. Every inch of the place once felt like home, a sanctuary of memories, laughter, shared moments. Now it felt cold, like a tomb. The kitchen, where they'd cooked meals together, where they'd shared quiet mornings, was just a place now. Nothing more. Nothing left. He moved from room to room, but each one seemed to mock him, reminding him of what he had thrown away. The living room, where they'd sat together on rainy nights, her head resting on his shoulder.
Gone.
The bedroom, where they had once fallen asleep in each other's arms. Now just a hollow reminder of a love he had carelessly destroyed. He stopped at the window, staring out into the night. The world outside seemed distant, so far removed from the chaos he felt inside. He had no direction, no purpose now. Maria had always been his anchor. Now she was gone. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a sharp sound that startled him. He fumbled for it, his hands unsteady. There was a message. From Maria. He stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it. His heart pounded as he read the words. I've left. I need space to think. Please respect that. The message was simple, but it hit him like a punch.
Space.
That word echoed in his mind. He wanted to beg her to come back, to take him back. But he knew better than to ask. He had no right. Her absence felt like an overwhelming force, crushing him under its weight. He didn't know what the future held. But one thing was clear. He had lost her. And nothing would ever be the same again. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering softly against the floor. He didn't pick it up. He couldn't. The message had been a final blow, delivered with painful clarity. He had hoped for something more, an explanation, a word of comfort, even just a hint of a possibility that she might come back. But all he had was that one line, brief and cold. I need space to think.
Space.
It felt like a cruel joke. How could he be expected to give her space when his entire world had just crumbled? When every part of him wanted to hold on, to fix it, to beg for another chance. But he understood. She needed to breathe, to escape him. And he had no choice but to let her. He sank down onto the couch, feeling the weight of the entire situation pressing down on him. The silence in the room was unbearable now. There was no sound but his ragged breathing. He glanced around again, as if expecting something to change, something to bring back the life that had vanished just hours ago. But everything remained the same. The photographs on the wall, happy moments frozen in time, mocked him now. He had destroyed it all. Each memory was a reminder of the trust he had shattered, the love he had betrayed. His mind raced through the last few days, trying to pinpoint where it had all gone wrong. Was it the late nights? The lies? The moments when he had chosen someone else over her? The truth stung more sharply with each passing thought. He had been so careless, so selfish. And now he had lost her. Maria wasn't coming back. He didn't know when or if she would even speak to him again. The future, once so full of possibility, now seemed empty and uncertain. The weight of his regret was suffocating, each breath harder than the last. He wanted to scream, to shout, to do something, anything, to fix what he had broken. But he knew, deep down, that there was nothing left to fix. Maria had seen through it all. She had finally realized what he was. And now, there was no escaping the consequences. He was alone. The hours drifted by unnoticed, each minute slipping past like a shadow. He hadn't moved from the couch, hadn't even bothered to turn on the lights. It felt as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Everything he had once taken for granted, his life, his marriage, the small, everyday moments, felt distant now. He stared blankly at the wall, his mind still trying to grasp the weight of what had happened. Everything felt muted, as if the colors had drained from the world. He wanted to reach out, to pick up the pieces, but they were scattered beyond his reach. The message Maria had sent him echoed in his mind again.
Please respect that. Respect.
It was the last thing he had expected her to ask for, but it was the only thing that made sense now. She needed distance.
Space.
And he had no choice but to give it to her. But that didn't stop the ache inside him. It didn't stop the feeling of being hollowed out. He had loved her with everything he had. Or so he thought. But love hadn't been enough. Not this time. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be faced. He had been reckless with her heart, and now he had to live with the consequences. Time seemed to slow down, each minute stretching into eternity as he sat there, unable to move, unable to think of anything other than the crushing emptiness. The house was too quiet, and the quiet only made the pain more unbearable. He thought back to the first time they had met, how her smile had lit up the room, how her laughter had filled him with warmth. He had fallen for her so easily. He had taken her for granted, never imagining a day when she might walk away. But now, that day had come. He couldn't rewind time. He couldn't undo the hurt he had caused. What remained was the cold, painful reality that Maria was gone. And he had no one to blame but himself. The truth weighed heavily on him, and the loneliness was a constant companion now. Everywhere he looked, everything he touched seemed to remind him of her. But she was gone, and there was nothing left to hold on to. His thoughts spiraled further into the darkness, and the house, once full of life, felt like a prison. Each breath felt shallow, each second like an eternity. There was no escape, not from the past, not from the truth, only the quiet. The silence was deafening now. Every corner of the house felt suffocating, a cage that he couldn't escape. He ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts tangled in a storm of regret. He could almost hear her voice, soft but steady, in his mind. "I can't do this anymore." The words had etched themselves into his soul, each repetition digging deeper. He had no one to blame but himself, no one else to place the weight of the blame on. He had chosen this. And now, the choice had consequences. He closed his eyes, trying to drown out the steady hum of his own thoughts. The clock on the wall continued ticking, each tick marking the passage of time, but it felt irrelevant now. The world outside moved on, but inside, he was frozen. He could picture Maria, somewhere far away, somewhere safe from him, trying to rebuild herself, trying to find a place of peace again. And he was left here, in this empty house, alone with nothing but his thoughts. No more excuses. No more second chances. There were no more opportunities to fix it. She had given him everything, and he had destroyed it. His heart ached with the weight of it, the pain of realizing how much he had taken for granted. He stood up, suddenly restless, needing to move, needing to do something, anything, to feel something other than the crushing emptiness. But as he walked through the house, he found that there was nowhere to go. The rooms felt foreign now. Each step he took only brought him back to the same reality. Maria was gone. And he had no idea where to go from here. He wandered into their bedroom, the room that had once been a sanctuary of quiet moments, shared dreams, and whispered promises. Now it felt like a battlefield. The bed was untouched, still made, a stark reminder of the life they once had. His gaze moved to the dresser, to the small trinkets they had collected over the years, pieces of a life that was now broken. He reached for one of the pictures, his fingers trembling as he ran them over the glass. It was a picture of them on their wedding day, smiling, happy, so full of promise. It felt like another lifetime, another version of him. The man in that picture would never have imagined that this is where things would end. The reality of it sank in deeper. He had lost everything, and there was no going back. He placed the picture back gently, as though the act of touching it might break it further. His eyes lingered on the photo for a moment longer, but the smile in the frame only made the weight in his chest grow heavier. He turned away from the dresser, the room feeling like it was closing in on him, suffocating him with memories of a life he no longer had. He tried to focus on the present, on something, anything, to distract him from the gnawing emptiness. But the silence returned, louder than ever. It wrapped around him, thick and oppressive. His footsteps echoed as he paced back to the living room, his movements slow and mechanical. Each step felt like a slow crawl, as though his body was resisting the reality of what had happened. Maria was gone. The words didn't make sense. They didn't fit into his mind. They were too final, too real. He sank back down onto the couch, his fingers nervously gripping the armrests. The room felt smaller now, each breath harder to take. What could he do now? What could he even say? Nothing. Nothing would change this. The part of him that had convinced himself there was still a chance, that maybe he could make things right, had been shattered the moment the door had clicked shut behind her. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the lies. It was everything, the trust, the promises, the life they had built. He had destroyed it all. And now, he was left with nothing but regret. It was a bitter taste in his mouth, a constant reminder of his own choices. He thought back to the moment when he had realized Maria knew the truth. The look in her eyes. The way she had stood there, so calm, so still, as if she already knew the end was inevitable. It had been a moment of clarity for him, one that had cut through all the excuses he had told himself. There was no escaping the truth. Not anymore. The weight of it was suffocating, and he struggled to breathe under its crushing force. But there was no escaping it. No way to undo what had been done. His phone buzzed again, but he didn't need to check it. He knew it was from her. A message, a call, maybe even just a simple reminder that she was still out there, somewhere beyond his reach. But he didn't want to know. He didn't want to hear her voice, to feel that sting of finality all over again. He couldn't take it. He couldn't take the thought of her moving on, finding peace, while he remained trapped in this endless cycle of self-inflicted pain. It was his fault. Every single part of it was his fault. And now, all he could do was sit in the darkness of his own making. The phone buzzed again, but this time, it felt like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. The silence in the room had thickened, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. But nothing did. His gaze lingered on the phone, but he couldn't bring himself to pick it up. What was the point? What could be left to say? He had already lost everything. His mind drifted back to the past, the small moments that once seemed insignificant, but now felt like they held the key to everything. The way Maria had always laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. How they had spent quiet Sundays together, just the two of them, without needing to speak a word. It seemed so simple, so perfect back then. But now, those memories were tainted by the painful reality of what had transpired. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the couch, willing the memories to fade, but they clung to him, haunting him with every detail. There was no escape from them, no way to outrun the mistakes he had made. He had thought he could fix things. He had told himself that if he tried hard enough, if he apologized enough, Maria would come back, that everything would be okay. But now he knew the truth. She was done. The realization settled in deeper, cutting through the remnants of his hope like a knife. She was gone, and there was no turning back. His chest tightened again, the weight of it so suffocating that it felt as though the walls were pressing in on him. Every breath felt like it took more effort than the last. He stood up abruptly, his body stiff with the overwhelming heaviness of it all. He couldn't stay here, in this house full of ghosts. But where could he go? He didn't even know who he was anymore. He walked toward the door, his feet dragging, the faint sound of his footsteps the only thing breaking the silence. When his hand reached for the door handle, he hesitated. For a moment, he thought about stepping outside into the world, as if that would somehow make things better. But he knew it wouldn't. Nothing would.
He was alone now.
He turned back to look at the empty house, at the spaces that once held so much life, so much love. Now it was just an empty shell, a stark reminder of everything he had thrown away. With a heavy heart, he stepped away from the door. There was nowhere left to run. He sank back into the couch, his body exhausted, his mind numb. The phone buzzed once more, but he didn't pick it up. He didn't want to. Maria was gone, and there was nothing left to say. Hours passed, but they felt like days. The house had grown colder, more silent with each minute. He hadn't moved since he last sat down, as though frozen in place by the gravity of what had happened. The world outside had shifted, time continuing its relentless march, but inside, everything felt suspended in the past. Maria was gone. That thought circled endlessly in his mind, its weight heavier than anything he had ever known. Every room in the house seemed to bear witness to the life they had shared, and now, every corner was filled with a hollow, aching emptiness. The photos, the furniture, even the faint scent of her favorite perfume on the pillow, they were all just reminders of what was lost. His phone buzzed again. It was her name on the screen. He stared at it, his heart pounding. For a moment, he almost reached for it, almost convinced himself that maybe this time it was different. Maybe this time she would come back. But deep down, he knew the truth. The reality of what he had done hit him harder than anything before. He had destroyed it all. There was no undoing the damage. His fingers trembled as he placed the phone down on the coffee table, unable to even look at it. He stood up slowly, a deep sigh escaping his lips. The weight of his regret was suffocating, a crushing reminder of the person he had become. The man who thought he could get away with it, who thought love could survive on empty promises and half-hearted apologies. But it hadn't. It was all gone now. He made his way back to the window, staring out into the darkness of the night. The world was still moving out there, unaware of the devastation that had unfolded within these walls. The house felt like a prison, and he was the warden, locked in with the consequences of his actions. Maria had walked away, and he knew, without a doubt, that she would never return. His phone buzzed one last time, but he ignored it. It was over. There was nothing left. The days blurred together, each one a slow, agonizing repeat of the last. The house felt colder now, quieter. The emptiness that Maria had left behind clung to every surface. He had become a shadow of the man he once was, walking through the motions of life without purpose or direction. Each day felt like a weight pressing down on him, each hour ticking away with an unrelenting finality. His phone remained untouched, still buzzing now and then with messages he couldn't bear to read. He knew they were from her, but he didn't want to face them. He couldn't. Maria had given him everything. Her trust, her love, her future. And he had thrown it all away. It wasn't just the affair, not just the lies. It was the slow erosion of everything that had made them what they once were. The missed moments, The unspoken words, the things left unsaid. Those were the things that had built the wall between them, brick by painful brick. He had tried to reach out, tried to apologize, but he knew deep down that it was too late. There was nothing left to say. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the house, he found himself standing in the doorway of their bedroom. The room that had once been a place of warmth and intimacy now felt foreign, cold. He stood there for a long time, just looking at the bed they had shared, the memories of their life together filling the space. It was a silent goodbye, a final acceptance of what he had lost. He turned off the light, then slowly walked away, leaving the room behind. And as he closed the door behind him, he finally understood. Sometimes, the things we love the most are the things we destroy. The silence in the house settled around him, familiar now, and he realized that for the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to escape it. He couldn't. There was nowhere left to run. The last thing he heard as he sat down on the couch was the soft, distant hum of his phone, a reminder that everything was gone. And he knew, for the first time, that he would have to live with it.